Thank you, Professor Aswathy. Now I would like to invite Mr. Aniruddha Bagchi, Managing Partner and Principal Consultant at KM Finpro Consultancy, to give up the keynote address. Mr. Bagchi has more than 25 years of experience in the field of banking and impact financing. His main domain skills include expertise in sustainable development, including design and delivery of A2F products of MSMEs, agricultural supply chains, and other social sectors. Before co-founding his own consultancy firm in 2019, he had worked across multiple geographies in different organizations, including at an Apex DFI in India, a UN agency at the Government of India Ministry of Finance, and a business media house. Mr. Bagchi will be joining us over Zoom. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. Good morning. Am I audible? Yeah. Respected Shri Ateesh Kumar Ji, Chief Guest, Joint Secretary, Ministry of MSME, Government of India. Professor Mahima Gupta, Member of the Board of Governors, IIM Amritsar. Professor Aswathy, Chairperson, ICMM, IIM Amritsar. Distinguished invitees and conference participants. A very good morning to all of you. In fact, I'm truly honored to be invited to deliver this inaugural keynote address for the Conference on Management of MSMEs. The theme of realigning business practices in the era of disruptions, of course, is very timely and topical now that we are in the midst of yet another COVID wave. Going through the program schedule, I have seen that it's an interesting mix of panels, planning to discuss both the supply side as also the demand side aspects of MSME sector. I congratulate the organizers for this, and I'm sure it will be bringing out key insights for all of us. While I will largely deal with the supply side issues, the demand side factors and the behavioral responses of different segments of the MSME sector would be a matter of much interest for policymakers and researchers in coming days. My address today, therefore, will try to focus on primarily 4 aspects. To begin with, I will deal briefly with the diversity and the complexity of the MSME sector, delving into the aspects of multiple segments the sector has. In fact, we have always been clubbing it at an aggregate level of MSME, but there is a very fine nuance of multiple segmentation in this. I will then follow this with a very quick overview of the institutional framework around the sector, the broad chronological progression of the key institutional buildup we have seen in this country today. Then I have a few important observations related to the pandemic and the disruption it has brought about in the sector and the policy response we have seen so far. In conclusion, I will touch upon the shift in policy direction, which is a very interesting observation, predominantly observed over the last 8 to 9 years, and its importance in handling the short to medium term crisis which the pandemic has triggered, and will also try to see as to how things might be shaping up in the immediate coming years. Talking about the diversity and the complexity of the MSME sector, we see that in defining the small, medium enterprises, every economy follows its separate principle. Most countries do not differentiate between the micro and the small enterprises, considering them kind of the same. The only differentiation is among the small, medium, and large. Those who differentiate have been following decisive factors such as number of employees, annual turnover, or investment in plant and machinery. In India, of course, the MSMEs were first defined by the MSME Act 2006. Prior to 2006, we had the small-scale industry sector, which was defined on the basis of investment in core plant and machinery. The 2006 Act brought in the distinction in the micro, small, and medium enterprises, as also the demarcation between the manufacturing and the service sector. So essentially, we are looking at 6 different subsectors, 3 each in manufacturing and the services sector, micro, small, and medium enterprises. And they recently, while announcing the policy package to combat the COVID-19 pandemic, a revision in the definition of MSMEs was approved by the Cabinet Committee in June 2020. With this, now in India, we have both the investment and turnover as standardized norms for the MSME classification. So, while these categories have been well defined, there are many finer nuances, as I was saying, within each segment, calling for a very differentiated policy approach. Further, the geographical expanse and the local state laws in India adds to the diversity and the depth of the sector. In fact, I have always been thinking when I look at the MSME sector as to what is the binding glue which binds the MSME sector. Legislatively, we definitely have an act, but certain times aggregating MSME as a sector can be a trap for researchers or even policymakers, and even sometimes lenders, because we have certain broad brush rules in lending sometimes. So definitely when we get into segmentation, we find that the MSME sector needs segmentation. So just to illustrate, I mean, if you look at a tier 1 auto vendor in Pune, or a BD maker in Mangalore, or a 3-star hotel in Chandigarh, even the new age startups, all are part of the same sector. Of course, there is a lot of data which we have from the NSS 73rd round, which was conducted in 2015 and 16. Roughly, we have an idea that there are around 6.34 crore MSMEs. I am not getting into the details of data in this speech, but I would like to indicate a few points in this. Today, we know that there are about 6,000 goods from the traditional to the technologically advanced items manufactured in the MSMEs. Interestingly, we have different needs within the same product. If we look at products also, in this regard, I find that if you take the example of coconut oil, which is a product, and it's a beautiful illustration of the differentiated need. Coconut oil can be manufactured for cooking, basically for edible purposes. It can be also manufactured as a hair oil, as well as an input for cosmetics. So each of these will definitely need a different packaging, very different marketing distribution networks, also different financial capital need. So what I'm trying to harp at is, even if you look at one single simple product like coconut oil, it has so deep nuances. In recent time, we have seen, of course, the MSME sector is of importance because it has a good higher growth rate, on an average registering around 13% growth, more than the growth rate of the country. It employs around 12 crores of people, and it is the second largest sector after agriculture, which is employing so large a number. And within these MSME sector segments, only the micro sector, if you look at the micro sector, it accounts for around 97% of the employment, and the rest by the medium and the small sectors. So therefore, when we actually drill down within this aggregate of MSME, we see that the micro sector is a large sector, contributing immensely by way of employment in the country. So just to highlight a few aspects on this, what I have been told, you see, MSME sector has important macroeconomic implications by way of employment, as we have seen. contribution to the national income, as also in exports. Almost 50% of the exports come from the MSME sector. But many academicians have pointed out that there are major data challenges in carrying out in-depth academic research on the sector. I think there is one panel also which will discuss this today. So while MSMEs are big in number, what has happened is that they have lacked identity. And although the government is putting in a lot of attention in this regard, now with the registration of MSMEs and giving them a unique ID, the thing started in around 2015 with the Udyog Aadhaar thing. Now the Ministry of MSME is taking very active steps in registration of enterprises. We expect that we will have a robust build-up of data in coming years. However, this is a very challenging task because bringing the informal segments, you see, we have a large informal segment within the MSME sector. Bringing them into the formal fold has definitely its own costs and many challenges for the policymakers also. I will give you an example. I mean, coming to the diversity of the the sector. About 12 years back in Ahmedabad, I happened to hear Madam Hila Bhatt, the founder of Seva, in a seminar. She was narrating an incident about a few members of Seva, all women and micro entrepreneurs in their own way. She was telling that these ladies were asking her, "Madam, hamara PAN card kab banega?" So that was, I mean, she was trying to explain that was a level of aspiration amongst these those marginalized women to be recognized as earning members in the society. And yet again, see the contrast. We have micro enterprises who prefer not to be registered for the fear that if they do so, they will be charged commercial rates for power, or they will be coming into the tax net, so on and so forth. So there is a fear psychosis which also runs parallel to get themselves registered. So there is definitely a very complex segmentation and stratification in the sector, which is inherently diverse. So this is not only in the physical existence with respect to the size and the structure, but also in respect to thought and behavior. So that's the important part. And we will see that these can have very important insights in policy making. I think the panel also is, one panel is also dealing with the consumer behavior and behavioral aspects of the sector. The second thing which I wanted to highlight is that we have definitely very broad estimates of MSMEs. But we know one thing, that the major part of the sector by way of number of enterprises has remained in the micro category, with a major chunk, of course, of employment also coming from it. The sense is that this percentage of micro enterprises has remained somewhat static. What is the trend of micro enterprises migrating into the small segment could be an interesting study with important policy implications. What we also know is that there is a large informal sector within the MSME domain, which is largely outside the purview of institutional reach. So therefore, given the fact that MSME sector is predominantly in the informal sector and largely in the micro sector, the micro segment will always remain an important policy aspect. And we have seen it in the institutional response also when the Mudra was created. So therefore, of course, it is also interesting to note that the micro sector itself has multiple sectors and subsegments within its fold, which again needs a differentiated policy approach, which is increasingly getting policy attention. So also coming to the pandemic, from the perspective of impact brought about by the pandemic, we see that, and also here, that the micro sector has been most adversely impacted, both on account of the business loss, as also the wage loss for workers employed therein. So therefore, this sector would definitely need critical policy and institutional attention, which of course, I'm sure the policymakers are aware of. Now, quickly coming to the MSME institutional framework. This is important because this had a role in implementing the packages we have seen for COVID. The Indian MSME sector, as we have all seen and read and also heard in the morning today, that it faces several constraints to growth, which is of course beyond access to credit only. And even any credit-based intervention will always be critically dependent on the progress of other fronts as well. Of course, the list is long, which includes lack of access to markets, access to value chains, difficulties in managing skilled, unskilled workforce, technology constraints, even unmet demand for better infrastructure, amongst others, of course. So to cater to this large and a diverse sector, we in India have a fairly wide network of dedicated institutional support structure, both on the lending side as also at the promotional and the developmental side. Let me give a quick overview. So if you see, there are 4 statutory bodies under the Ministry of MSME, starting with since the mid 1950s, we had the NSIC, the KVIC, 1955 and 1957 respectively. Then early 60s, we had the SISIs, the Small Industry Service Institutes, which are now rechristened as National Institute for MSMEs. Then the 4th one, which we have under the statutory body under the Ministry of MSME, is the Mahatma Gandhi Institute for Rural Industrialization, as early as 2016. We have also witnessed the emergence of SIDBI as a dedicated development finance institution for the sector, which was carved out of IDBI in 1989 and started operations in 1990. So we are almost more than 30 years of development finance from SIDBI. Today, we also have a dedicated credit guarantee agency for the micro and small enterprises, which is Credit Guarantee Trust for Micro Small Enterprises, which happened in 2000. We have seen later emergence of several other guarantee organizations, including the National Credit Guarantee Trustee Organization under the Ministry of Finance, which came up in 2014 and had an important role to play in dispensing the pandemic packages. We have seen a dedicated credit rating agency called SMIRA, which happened in 2006. Now it's called Acuity Ratings. We have seen a dedicated asset recovery institution for the sector. There's a whole startup ecosystem, from incubation centers to venture capital and now also venture debt institutions. We have 2 dedicated SME stock exchanges, which happened after 2013-14 during that period. We also have 3 trade receivable platforms after the Reserve Bank of India came out with the licenses for trades. And the latest being, we also have a dedicated refinancing institution for micro units. So you see the segmentation also has come up in the shift in the policy thinking. So there is Mudra, which happened in 2015, which is a refinancing agency for micro units. And there is a corresponding credit guarantee for micro units as well under NCGTC. Apart from these, we have public sector banks, private sector banks, non-banks, including microfinance institutions. There are cooperative banks, regional rural banks, small finance banks. We also have many banks having dedicated MSME products with special dispensation centers. Like, for example, the Bank of Baroda had the SME loan factory. Of course, there is a larger ecosystem of skilling institutions, entrepreneur development institutions, industry associations, the academic world, and the research world. And added to these, of course, very importantly, we are now witnessing the emergence of a new class of entities, the new age fintech companies. So if we see in the institutional space, there has been a visible effort in addressing specific issues related to MSMEs, whether it is entrepreneurship development, access to finance by introducing collateral-free lending, whether it is rating, or whether there are growth funds for assisting the growth cycle through providing venture capital funds and growth funds. We have seen many of these initiatives, especially in the span of last 15 to 20 years. Of course, many government initiatives have helped a larger MSME ecosystem in developing new institutions in the private space also, with new products, new processes, and new platforms. So the institutional network which we see today, of course, with whatever existing bandwidth we have and all its challenges, have played a very vital role in implementing the government-sponsored schemes and the COVID response packages, especially when we look at the credit guarantee institutions and the latest credit guarantee institution, NCGTC, which happened only 6-7 years back. So coming to now the third part of the COVID package, I mean, we all know about the packages. I will not get into the details of the packages. We know that at an aggregate level, the MSME sector has been one of the most vulnerable sectors during the pandemic because of its size, scale of business, and difficulty in accessing financial resources. However, it is the micro sector which has been most adversely impacted, especially the self-employed category within the micro sector. So there are studies which are now coming up as to what kind of impact we have seen. Many surveys are happening. Some of them say that approximately 95% of the firms were impacted negatively due to the first lockdown imposed in April 2020, and business was disrupted till about August 2020. So we will maybe have more analysis and light on this in coming days, because we are yet to come out with the exact impact of the pandemic. Of course, from the MSME side, there is definitely going to be a need to re-strategize their overall value propositions in improving quality of products, strengthening distribution channels, coming up with new innovations on promotion of their products. So we see that there is a strong need for a strong digital ecosystem, both from the supply side and also from the demand side, to improve the outreach of the products. Of course, Government of India in its efforts have started the e-marketplace, which is called GEM, to increase the share of MSMEs in government procurement. So a digitally activated market ecosystem will definitely reduce cost, improve efficiency, foster product development, and more importantly, improve the safety of workers working in these institutions. So, I mean, the step is collaboration with research institutions, technology startups, maybe existing foreign players, to develop low-cost production base and penetrate further in the Indian market. So looking at the package, of course, it had 3 to 4 important packages from the Ministry of Finance, primarily the guarantee-backed emergency credit lines we have seen, which was to address the liquidity and working capital issues. There was an equity and quasi-equity infusion for stressed and non-performing entities, again backed by collateral or non-collateral credit guarantee support. And we have also seen easing out of foreign competition, and most importantly, the definitional change in MSMEs to include a turnover and to expand the gamut of MSMEs as such. So these are basically the immediate response we have seen. It is reported that through these supportive programs like the emergency credit lines, the guarantee schemes, from the RBI side, the low repo rates, the e-market market linkages, the Provident Fund EPF support for both businesses and workers, they have definitely started showing positive results. While the government has taken very quick and timely action on the supply side, there has been some criticism, I might say, that a large part of the MSMEs have mostly in the informal sector has been perhaps excluded from this. So the actual impact may be known in coming months, but I suppose more studies will be taken up. Now I come to the important part, the last part of my lecture, which where I will look into the policy direction. Here I would like to take an interesting note that during the last 8 to 10 years, there has been a distinct shift in policy direction and attention, which I'd like to flag. The first one is that we have witnessed a very clear and focused, differentiated policy approach for different subsectors and segments of the MSME sector. What is observed is a clear institutional attention towards recognizing the segmentation of the sector. I will cite a few specific examples. You see, the introduction of the MSMED Act in 2006 and redefining the MSME definition was perhaps the most defining moment for the sector, where we saw a focused, segmented approach. If we see that with the GST now having completed 4 years, linking the sectoral definition with the turnover will also help in easy identification, streamlining, and also last mile delivery of many government benefits. Coming to another institutional intervention which has happened is creation of a new credit guarantee management entity under the Ministry of Finance, National Credit Guarantee Trustee Company, which was set up in 2014 to handle multiple credit guarantee programs, each separately targeted with a very focused approach. There were dedicated programs for women entrepreneurs under the Stand Up India program of the Government of India. There were guarantee programs for startups. There was a credit guarantee program exclusively for micro units. And of course, this institution, although very young, has played a critical role in dispensing the credit guarantee-backed emergency credit lines. So that is a point to be noted. The third illustration is the creation of Mudra, again, which I referred to as a separate dedicated institution for micro units. This happened in 2015 and is also very important segmented institutional intervention. Interesting to note is that within Mudra, there is a clear recognition of 3 sub-segments of loan requirements. The Shishu, Kishore, Tarun, it actually deals with the overall loan requirement of 10 lakhs. And within that, we have 3 distinct segments of Shishu loans, Kishore loans, and Tarun loans. The policy thought at that point in time was to supplement the efforts of the priority sector lending. Of course, in the priority sector lending, the MSMEs had an explicit sub-target to expand the credit supply, but still, I think it was not as expected as the policymakers thought. So therefore, the creation of Mudra to give it a more focused and segmented approach. So this segmented policy approach is definitely a clear shift and much needed for the sector. The second important shift has been recognizing the need for creating a strong digital ecosystem. So there is a new shift in technology adoption in banks, in government institutions, and including efforts of banks in collaborating with the new age fintechs. Of course, with the capacity to dispense credit very quickly, fintech lending has the potential to transform the MSME lending landscape. Although it is very nascent at this stage, but we will see that it will take traction with exponentially. In fact, that's the hope I also have. We have also seen platform-driven institutional interventions like the TREADS platform, which I was talking about for trade receivable platforms in recent years, which the RBI initiated in around 2014-15. And they have given out 3 licenses for TREADS platform, which of course addresses the receivables problems for MSMEs. Incidentally, yesterday I was reading an article, I think, on TCS, where the TCS CEO, Mr. Subramanian, was indicating that India's growth will be platform-driven. And he indicated that TCS is aggressively investing in banking platforms and APIs for microservices that can connect to the Indian digital stack. So the Indian stack denotes a number of APIs that allows governments and businesses to connect and engage in offering digital services to the Indian users. In fact, my recent discussions with colleagues in banks, I have come to understand that many are shifting to different modes of digital lending. Some of them have also adopted digital documentation, which is more convenient and very well suited for situations we are in today, especially in pandemic conditions. So you don't need to come physically for a documentation. Third important aspect, policy aspect, which is observed is that there is a concerted effort in bringing the informal sector within the formal fold. If you see the registration on the Udyam portal taken up by the Ministry of MSME, this will definitely help data-backed policy decisions in coming years. I think the pandemic has shown us how the institutional network we have today have helped in quickly implementing policies for the MSME sector, albeit maybe skewed and in favor of larger of the small and medium enterprises. But still, that is also a humongous number. It has also perhaps shown us that dealing with large informal segments has remained a challenge and needs more innovative and inclusive program designs at various levels. No doubt, this process of bringing the informal sector within the formal fold, also adopting new technologies, cannot be, of course, one-sided only from the supply side. There would, of course, be a lot of questions on the process of this change, the cost of such change and adaptations. Any sudden disruption can be very costly, could be counterproductive also. So it has to be a very well thought out blend of incentives and more importantly, nuanced with handheld initiatives. So like me, I'm sure many will see a more pronounced and a coordinated role for development financial institutions for the MSME sector in coming days. And I'm sure the discussions today will also dwell upon the issues which we have tried to address in this first speech. Thank you so much and all the best for the conference. Thank you.